Hi, Abby. Thank you so much, and Rob, thank you very much indeed for the nice introduction, and also for inviting me to participate and offer something with the Satie Center. It's a real delight and honor. I've been a kind of long distance admirer of Gil Fronsdal for a long time. I used to during COVID, there were a couple of periods when I did a lot of those early morning sits on YouTube that he I think he's still offering, and I absolutely love them. And I love the Dharmets that he would offer at the end. Oh, great sits and then great Dharmets. I don't know whether I kind of imagine that a lot of you are familiar with Gil and what he offers. There was something about the particular path that he's had where there was quite a deep immersion in Zen that then moved into a very deep Theravada training of different kinds as well that really resonated with me. Um, I don't think I've gone quite so deeply into either, but I've certainly tried, and I'm feeling more and more called to somewhat sort of ecumenical approach, if we could call it that, or not quite such a sort of silo-based approach that is one of the I'm gonna introduce things properly in a moment, but just a little aside here, still on Gil and his approach. That the idea of, I mean, the great thing that's been happening in the Dharma in the last 50, 60, 70 years in the West has been this particular thing that hasn't, I think, ever happened before in quite the same way in the history of the Dharma, where different Dharma traditions are really, really having to reckon with one another, are having to meet one another. There's been such a strong thing that, if you're living in rural Japan and there's a Shinto temple and there's a Zen temple, and you're the priest or the officiant at a Zen temple there, you're not going to know really about other kinds of Buddhism. You're just not really going to be exposed to that. You're going to know this history that your Zen place is directly connected to Shakyamuni Buddha 2,500 years ago, 2,400 years ago. And there's a single line of succession that leads from Shakyamuni Buddha to the particular priest that you are in this remote Zen temple. And you'll have no idea really that there are multiple other streams of Buddhism. And it's sort of not your fault. It's quite natural. That's the way most traditions evolve, convinced that they are the one true line, and it's okay. They may be one very good line, actually, but we're having to reckon, many of us now who have been in a deep immersion in a single tradition at some point, reckon with this marvelous pluralism that must be developing, just within Buddhism, which is somehow, I think, inherently well designed to be pluralistic, actually, very open to a breadth uh, of views, because it's such a sort of complex systems based approach to existence, really, I think, deep down. So it's inherently good for pluralism. And Gil is manifesting that in a beautiful way. I'm trying to uh, I'm trying to offer something that is inherently more open to different facets, different sides, different dimensions of practice, because basically we human beings are multifaceted and multidimensional. And it's not likely that one single approach is actually going to meet all our developmental needs. That's my conviction, and I'm very open to being persuaded otherwise. But for now, that's the way I see things. And that's what this approach, Original Love, is really about. And that's what the book is trying to convey. Um, so before I go deeply into sort of what Original Love is all about, what I mean by that term, how I see it sort of breaking down, and how the particular forms of practice that I am trying to offer. at the moment, and the view of practice generally that I'm trying to offer. Before we get too much into that, basically, I want to get us into a sit, and so that's where we're heading now. But let me just say that I do believe the kind of calling out of love is I think it's rather a, maybe it's a strong way to put it, but anyway, the calling out of compassion, of kindness, of understanding, of empathy, of a more open-hearted approach is actually a really important thing at this particular time when, as we all know, the fires of hate, the second poison in Buddhism, the three poisons, the fires of hate are being stoked, and hate has become, or at the very least, highly um, sort of oppositional and I was going to say sectarian, but that's not strong enough. Deeply oppositional positions. In the body politic, in social life generally, in the understanding of our place in the world and self and other. That's become, alas, rampant and really fired up. As we all know, the last decade or two, social media has obviously played its part. Actually, there's nothing new there. There have been successive waves of highly, hate is being normalized. Exactly. There have been waves in human cultural history, particularly European cultural history, where this has happened before. There was the English Civil War of the 1640s actually was preceded by the arrival in the UK of small, cheap printing presses, which allowed the printing of pamphlets, which were basically single long sheets in those days, where anybody could rant and rave about anything, print off 100, 500, 1,000 of these sheets, post them everywhere, and just get a whole lot of foment riled up, get people riled up. And that led to the upheavals that ultimately caused the Civil War with a lot of death and slaughter. And there's a great book on this subject called The World Turned Upside Down. And so and then, of course, in the early 20th century, the invention of the radio led to fascism, basically. The ability, the possibility of mass media where one belligerent man could speak to millions of people directly through the radio. That hadn't happened before. And look at what happened in Europe in the 20s and 30s and 40s. So this is, something like it is happening again now with social media. So all the more reason for us to do our best, in our practice, in the incredibly valuable space that all of us here know about, which is a meditative practice, to be actually discovering within our own intrinsic capacity for caring and compassion and collaboration. And I would argue, more than that, also our own intrinsic belonging in a wider, this is, I may get a little woo-woo here, but a sort of wider experience that we're actually plugged into of the whole of creation, the whole universe. We're actually part of it. And to discover that is to discover, among other things, maybe a sense of a kind of boundless love that I think is, you can see traces of it in all the Buddhist traditions that talk about awakening, non-dual experience. You can see traces of it. It's often not called forth quite as explicitly, as I've done with this term original love, but it's there, and I think it's I mean, I'm open to being corrected, definitely, but I feel that it's a good thing to be calling out, especially at this time. Anyway, so that's my little manifesto. Let's get settled in for sitting. I'm going to assume that everybody here already has a practice. Is that a fair assumption? Rob, do you think that's a safe assumption? Yeah, okay. Okay. I will be offering guidance. So if you're not in that category, it'll be okay. I'll be leading us. Um, but so we're going to be still, primarily still, mostly still for probably 30, maybe 35 minutes. We'll see how it goes. And so I invite you. I can see a lot of people getting set up. That's great. I invite you to get set up. How you'd like to be for meditation. And I do, really, I'm a big fan of comfort, actually, over any notion of a correct posture. I think the correct posture is the comfortable one. Um, so do be comfortable. That does include reclining and lying down if that's best for you right now. Don't hesitate, actually. And if you're getting into the sit and you start to feel, man, I want to lie down, I think it's good to do so, to follow those promptings. And many of us find fatigue in our systems at times when we're coming into stillness. So it could well be that the most humane thing you can do would be to lie down and perhaps drift off. And I believe that's okay. Many of you might know Kelly Boys, who's a yoga nidra teacher. She and I have taught together, and she takes people very deep, albeit that it includes dipping in and out of sleep. That's okay. So if you do start to feel you need to lie down, please do so. Meanwhile, I'm going to be offering guidance, kind of with the assumption that you're upright, but just take it, take what parts of it are relevant and helpful for you. So if you're sitting with your back unsupported, it is really important to be balanced. So either closing the eyes or lowering the gaze. Just starting to kind of tune in to arrive here, right where you are. And to be looking for comfortableness. Letting this, be a safe place, comfortable place. So feel your weight in the seat. Feel those two sitting bones connecting with the support beneath you. See if you can kind of allow your upper body to float above that. So there's a real deep rootedness in the seat. Somehow that might create a kind of lightness in the upper body. And allow the upper body to find its way to comfortable Well, uprightness, effortless uprightness. And sometimes it can be that the more we sense weight in our seat, the easier it is for the upper body almost to float into a natural place of balance. Just checking, ears are balanced, jaw is loose. Imagine there were a kind of sling under your jaw, and that the jawbone is resting in it, the lower mandible resting in some kind of sling. And you might notice that that invites a softness into the throat and the tongue. But at the same time, you might feel that the shoulders are softening, relaxing, and likewise the arms, kind of letting the arms wilt and letting the fingers be limp. We can bring some awareness now to the torso, basically the chest and the belly. Just inviting chest and belly to be loose and open. Really kind of almost floppy. It's sort of really let them go, let them be open. And then that can lead us to sensing the gentle expansion and contraction of the breath. So just for a little bit, let's watch the opening and the diminishing of the breath. A little bit like a kind of soft bellows action, gentle bellows. You might see if the exhales are ready to be a little bit more like a sigh, a release, just in a small way, as if the exhales just kind of float down by themselves. Okay, lovely. Now, let's also be aware of our feet making contact with the floor or ground beneath us. Just feeling the light pressure, perhaps a faint warmth of the contact between feet and floor. And now let's allow the legs to be limp, soft, still. And let's just see if we're ready to have a sense of the whole body. The whole body is a kind of approximately egg-shaped energy field, almost like a bubble, egg-shaped bubble. So it's more a sense of the whole, energy field of the body rather than, precisely tracking the individual parts of the body. Y- You might quite likely have a faint image in the mind of the body, and if you do, that's just fine. And but see if you can, as it were, let it be, let that body imago or image be sort of enclosed in a kind of approximately egg-shaped bubble. And let's just see if we can sense a little bit of warmth in that body field, that field of body awareness. Is there some kind of pervasive warmth in it? It's fine, by the way, if thoughts bubble up. Just when you notice that's happened, just acknowledge it, label it thinking, be happy you've noticed, and come back to this resting in a body-wide awareness. as we're resting in a body-wide awareness, let's also sense the gentle to and fro of the breath. Let it be like a little tidal current that flows gently into the body field and then flows gently out of it. You can just rest with the sense of the breath coming and going. Or if you're curious, you could investigate how how far does it seem to stir within the field of the body? How far does it come in, this little tidal current? Can you sense stirrings perhaps throughout the body, or at least a little more widely than you might have expected? It may be very subtle, by the way. Is subtle tidal movements associated with the breath. Does anything happen, for example, in your forearms or hands when you breathe, uh, however subtle? Can you sense some subtle stirring in the lower legs or feet associated with the coming and going of the breath? Might there be some subtle stirring throughout the body field associated with the breath, with its soft coming and going? Is there some subtle way that the whole body might be breathing? As we're sitting with the whole body and the breath, perhaps the whole body breathing, what would it be like to add, to just drop in a couple of grains of gratitude into the experience? Is it possible to let there be just a little shade of gratitude for this stirring of the breath, for this body breathing? If Kuan Yin or some other icon of compassion were to just let fall a couple of droplets of gratitude into this experience, what would that be like? Is it possible that somehow there might be a certain tenderness around this breathing body, around this process of breathing, however that might show up for you, just some kind of softness or tenderness just around this body breathing. Not really something to kind of think through. It's more just, is there somehow a gentleness or a tenderness almost in the very fabric of the experience of this body breathing? Not really something we can explain, is almost more of a sensory thing in the texture of this experience, this body breathing. It's perfectly okay if it's not showing up for you that way. Just be with it the way it is. Really, no need to do anything here, now. Dropping any need to do anything, actually. Just being with what is. in the last phase of this period of practice, if you're curious, just see what it's like to let the range of awareness expand to include the soundscape around you. So there's still the sense of the body breathing, but actually awareness can also include the kind of wrap around space in which sound arises. And no need to do this if you'd rather stay as you are. But either way, really being in a very restful condition where we're simply receiving whatever's arising in awareness. Resting in the, as it were, the full bath of sense experience, body and the breath, and the soundscape. Soaking, resting, basking in the whole thing. We're going to have a soft, slow closing of this period of meditation. So by all means, sort of cruise on. If you are cruising, cruise a bit longer if you'd like to. We can also be gently bringing movement back into the body, raising the eyes, and we'll reconvene actually in 3 minutes. 50. Yeah, thank you. Thank you all very much for, coming along for the ride on that sit. I hope you found it interesting and helpful in some way. um, Now I'm gonna just dive in, I think, and just share a little bit about this sort of concept and a certain sense approach to practice. that I've called original love. Of course, one of the motivations for that, I don't know if it's provocative, but maybe a little grand title, is really twofold. One of them is, of course, some of you might have, if you've heard about it, you might have thought of this. It's a little bit of a critique of the idea of original sin that's in there. And um, I think there's a fairly well attested generalization that has been made about basically Western spirituality and Eastern spirituality, largely European based spirituality, and Asian based spirituality. I think there is a distinction that you can make that holds up more or less, that the primary model in the West is that we're messed up and we need to be redeemed. We've gone astray and we need to be brought back. We're basically, fundamentally awry, and an outside force has to intervene and quote unquote redeem us. That's a fairly well attested sort of foundational model. By contrast, at least when you look by contrast with Asia, where the primary sort of model of spirituality seems to be that no, actually, we're fundamentally great, we're fundamentally good and right and well. The problem is that dust and debris and confusions of different kinds have accreted over that fundamental rightness, if you see what I mean. So it's interesting really to compare those two models, and I think they're thought to largely hold up, these two. So, in a way, this statement, or this declaration, original love, is really just pointing more that way. That actually, what if it's not so much that we need some kind of training of whatever form that may be. And, most religions do seem to think we need some kind of training. Most spiritual traditions are, in fact, some kind of training. But rather than that being a training that sort of prepares us to receive the beneficent hand of an outside force that will put us to right, what if the training, in fact, is really more about clearing up the confusions, more than confusions, the poisons, in that language, the three poisons of Buddhism that confuse us, that send us off away from what is originally right already within us, and that the training, the practice, is about coming back to find an original wellness, an inherent wellness, okayness, goodness, even, that is already here. And why not call that original love? That's sort of the idea. Um, so again, uh, a second origin of this phrase for me personally was in Zen. There's a lot of talk about original nature. In it comes up throughout Mahayana Buddhism. There's a thing called Buddha nature, but it's not a thing, but it is a discovery that we can make. That there's some level or dimension or register of our very own consciousness that we're not habituated to seeing or feeling or sensing, but it's very much here, always here. And when we drop into it, or however the language might be, when we discover it, when we sense it, when we awaken to it, what we find is that it's universal, it's everywhere, it can't be absent, it's without beginning, it's without end, meaning essentially time is not in its nature. It's actually in that nature, in that awareness, in that whatever it is, there's no time. So it's without beginning, without end. Actually, there's also no space, there's no distance. Everything's here. Somehow all things are it. And yet at the same time, it's not anything because it's empty, it's shunyata. And we can sort of awaken to that original nature. There are some Zen teachings where the terminology is made a bit more poetic, and original nature is called original face. And there are teaching prompts, teaching questions, koans, little little anecdotal snippets that as part of Zen teaching in some traditions, known as koans. One of them is, "Have you seen your original face?" Actually, the full language of it is, "Have you seen the original face that you've had, not just since before you were born, but since before even your parents were born? You have had an original face. Have you seen it?" So that's actually just really poetic language for, hey, folks, there's this Buddha nature, this original nature that you have. Have you discovered it yet? Yeah, kind of thing. So, prompted by that, I felt I wanted to use this term original love because anytime, more or less, anytime somebody does glimpse this original nature, it tends to bring up there may be other things too, but it tends to bring up a sense of extraordinary belonging, that I am not the separate entity stalking this earth in its lonely search for what it wants and to avoid what it doesn't want. I'm not that. I'm not the isolated, separate, constricted, contracted sense of self I've felt myself to be one way or another for a long time. And I may have done various kinds of practice and that have helped to sort of assuage that sense to some degree or to a great degree. But actually, in the moment of awakening to this quote unquote original nature, I discover that that's only ever been a very provisional idea, that sense of self. It's really been no more than a thought or a cluster of thoughts or a particular kind of thought, which we could go into in more detail. Um, but I have now seen that it wasn't the totally true thing that it had presented itself as being. And instead, I'm part of something quite different, and I'm not just sort of part of it. It's really that's deep down what I actually am. And that discovery, known in Zen as Kensho, or as in most Buddhist traditions as awakening, it really overturns in William James's language, it overturns the hegemony of the everyday rational self. It overturns the rule, the reign of the separate sense of self. And when we get a glimpse of that, or even more when we really plunge into it, or even more when it becomes perhaps more of a stable way of experiencing this world, there is a there is I think inevitably some sort of deeper sense of love because of the deep belonging it brings on. Hence, original love. Okay, so that's just a word or two on the title of the book and the sort of concept of it behind the title. Now, allow me to just say a little bit about the sort of approach that I'm trying to share in this book. And we've had a program actually called Original Love that's been running for about 4 or 5 years now, an entirely online, more or less entirely online meditation program. Um, and I think it's sort of morphing a bit now. I noticed some of you have discovered our app, The Way. Thank you very much if you're for trying it out, if you have done so. It's informed by sort of similar understanding of practice that is in this book. And when I say this book, I mean this book, original though, that I'm going to be sort of speaking from. So what is this book, and what is this approach? What is its particular ways of slicing and dicing the vast field of meditation practice? So it starts with an early Chinese Buddhist document by a guy called Seng Cho in the 6th century or late 5th century, who said that practice was like a wagon trail with 2 wheel ruts, as of course, any cart track must have one for either wheel. And if you imagine, an image of a cart track sort of winding through fields, it has 2 wheel ruts, clearly. And he says one of those wheel ruts is the foundations of mindfulness, and the other one, he says, is principle, which is a Taoist and early Chinese Buddhist term for awakening, or as they often called it, realization. So what's the difference? Well, the first track in this view is a gradual, progressive, developmental path of practice. And one way to just come straight at it is by looking at the Satipatthana Sutra, which is this, the classic Foundations of Mindfulness Sutra. 4 foundations of mindfulness: the body, feelings or sensations, which basically means the valence of experience, whether it's positive, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, or neither pleasant nor unpleasant, is number 2. Number 3 is the mind, which actually we might understand more like sort of emotion states, mood states, affective orientations, and attitudes and so on. And then fourthly, dharmas, which basically means, in terms of the Satipatthana Sutta, this absolutely classic Theravada Sutra, it seems to mean some of the primary foundational teachings that categorize experience, and so you can bring those into your practice as lenses, as frameworks for understanding experience. And all of that is kind of somewhat sequential. It's certainly programmatic, and it certainly is understood to develop over time. And it's perfectly reasonable. It is a form of training that takes time, and it takes practice, and you can get better at it. You can also go deeper and deeper and deeper into it as you progress through it. You start analyzing little packets of experience more and more finely, and it gets finer and finer grained. And so your general experience of any moment becomes increasingly kind of acute and fine grained, and that brings with it, an unpacking, analysis, a breaking down of the great clump called me and my life. Sort of just one lump that's me and my life. You gradually discover, no, it's made of multiple threads, like a tapestry. It's made of multiple component parts. And actually, as you break things down, you tend to open up more and more. This sense of being kind of locked into a way of being, and of being the single contracted self that's trying to navigate between pain and pleasure, gain and loss, success and failure, good name, bad name, and so on. That very contracted lump of me in my life is precisely what is gradually getting unlocked and unraveled and becoming more open through this programmatic path of practice. So that's all great. Why is there another wheel rut? What's wrong with just that as a path? Well, the reason that there's another wheel rut is this great sort of discovery and insight of early Buddhism and later Buddhism and of Taoism and of Advaita Vedanta and of yogic Vedic thought and so on. Great discovery that has been well known in Asia since probably Indus Valley civilization of 1500 BCE, Mohenjo-daro, where there's it's we don't really know, but anyway, it goes way back. The discovery, the sudden thing called realization, which is not dependent on any of the stuff in the first wheel rut. It's a flash of discovery that I have never been the separate self I thought I was. It's not a gradual deconstructing of the self. It's not a gradual deconstructing of how I perceive and experience the world. It's a sudden, radical seeing through of the whole way I've constructed self and world. Okay, now, this is the the great thing about this is that it's real and it happens and it's true and it does actually reveal something very profoundly important about the nature of our experience and of what we call this human life. And it happens to people. There's sort of no doubt about it. People do sometimes get struck by revelations, epiphanies, awakenings. I mean, the language is a little tricky, but basically, and sometimes the interpretations put on these can range wildly. Sometimes they're given theistic overlays, but I mean, fundamentally, I don't think they need anything like that. They're simply insights into the nature of the sense of self and its relationship to the world. Um, Now, Buddhism seems to have known about this all along. There are stories in Theravada of people who come to the Buddha. They hear just a snippet of his teaching and boom, they get it. And they see, quote unquote, the deathless. They see that which does not die. And maybe that means, in a more secular understanding, they discover this original nature that doesn't do time. They suddenly discover that there's actually, let's say, a level of consciousness, of awareness, where the construction of a sense of time is not going on, nor is the construction of a sense of self, nor is the construction of a world that is not self. Those aren't going on this level of awareness. That there be some, in some Advaita, modern Advaita people call it pure consciousness, a sort of consciousness that is actually, you sort of drop beneath all the presuppositions, all the presuppositions about the way things are, all the conditioned views are not there. It's a consciousness that's actually pure, meaning free of them, of the ordinary suppositions we make about life. Okay, I'll just pause for a moment, just to sort of let this sink in a bit and see what floats up for all of us. Yeah, so just a little recap. This cart track metaphor is suggesting that on the one hand, there's the practice of gradually deepening, clarifying, coming to understand and also to experience, this basically this very moment in fresh ways based on our dismantling, our analysis, our breaking apart, our deconstructing of our habituated ways of understanding, and the bedrock of which is really about self and other, or self and world, as being cast ironly separate. from one another. Now, all that's being gradually deconstructed. And along the way, we're having great insights. We're also dismantling habits of mind. We're becoming essentially we're deconstructing suffering in a fairly reliable and sort of predictable way, even if we follow the instructions and the path of training. So that's tremendous. And again, it would beg the question, what's this other wheel rut? Why have another one? What's wrong with that? Well, there's nothing wrong with that at all. It's great. It just so happens that sometimes people suddenly get the whole picture, or they get that the picture that they've had has been just a trick of light. And one tweak in the angle of light, and bam, they see it's a transparency. I thought it was absolutely opaque and solid, and it's a transparency, you know, or however we would phrase it. They suddenly just see this profoundly liberative insight that, that there's this original nature everything has, and well, what is that? Well, some say, but Vedic Advaita folks, it's pure consciousness. It's the original, or sometimes it's called the fourth consciousness. Yeah, I don't know if you know this term, the Turiya. There's one of the great Upanishads is the Chandogya, I think it is, where it lays it out very clearly. There are four consciousnesses. There's waking consciousness, dreaming consciousness, sleeping consciousness. So it's trying to cover the whole terrain of human experience. Waking consciousness, everything that happens when we're awake, all of that is within waking consciousness. Yeah, but sometimes we're sleeping and we dream. Well, that's dream consciousness. Fine, that's a second consciousness. What about when we're not dead, but we're in deep sleep? There's another one. There's sleep consciousness. So there's three consciousnesses. They're trying to cover the totality of experience. But well, what about this fourth one? The fourth one is what all three are made of. And the goal of yogic training in this view is to discover the fourth one. Because then you see what the entirety of your experience has actually been all along. It's been this hidden, not really hidden, but unnoticed fourth consciousness, the Turiya, which just means fourth. The fourth consciousness. Everything's made of the fourth consciousness. And that fourth consciousness itself has the capacity to be everything, but it itself is without characteristic. Or we might just say empty in more Buddhist terminology, shunya. Or we might say pure. That's the word they like. So let's see. So that's why there's a second wheel rut on this cart track. Because actually, in a certain sense, from the perspective of the second wheel rut, everything you're doing on that first one is maybe it's helpful, but in a certain way, it's kind of a waste of time. Because every little last part of the first wheel rut is actually already the second wheel rut. And you just have to realize that. Okay, so is this making some conceptual sense so far? Yeah, okay, I'm getting some thumbs up. Yeah, okay. So, I mean, maybe for some of you, yes, and for some of you lurking with your cameras off, you think, what the hell is this guy talking about? I don't know. Anyway, I'll keep going. So okay, Henry, just pause a moment. Let's just have a little pause. I'm gonna just check where I've got to and what's still to come. Yeah, okay. So now, why have I bothered to write this book? Well, there are a couple of risks in all of this, a couple of pitfalls. I'm sure there's many, but I'm talking about sort of major ones. The first one is is like this. You could spend a lot of time trying to kind of get down some perfect practice on the first wheel, right? And not actually recognize that there is a much larger vista, a much larger view that's here all along. So you could spend perhaps much longer than you really need to trying to perfect your practice on the first wheel rut. I'm going to come back to this. I want to just lay out the two primary pitfalls. There's a way we might be kind of training ourselves actually to not see the vaster vista of the second wheel rut because our practice is so fine grained and we're trying to perfect it and get really good at it. It actually, there might be a law of diminishing returns kind of thing, if you see what I mean, with too much um, perfection, attempts to perfect practice on the first wheel rut. There's a, maybe I can say this in another way. Some of you will know Locke Kelly and his teaching. He's got a great book, Effortless Mindfulness. And in it, he's got this great little section at the back of kind of common pitfalls in practice, 3 or 4 pages or something, little 2 or 3 liners. And he talks about this in one of them. There's a lot of people are worried about spiritual bypassing. That was a terminology created by John Welwood in the 80s for people who were just throwing themselves into practice, hoping it would solve marriage problems, hoping it would, solve career problems, and hoping that somehow if they just did more sitting, other areas of life would automatically be helped by it. And in fact, it turned out in a way they were really just avoiding other areas of life that they were having problems in. So the term spiritual bypass was coined by John Welwood. Yeah, to me, it's not that different from, say, workaholism, or when getting just so into some pastime. Maybe it's running or something. And I mean, it could be something that is in itself a good thing. It's just that when we're doing it to a great extent and somehow ignoring other sides of life that we hope might magically be helped by this other thing we're doing, then it's this other spiritual practice we're doing. Then it's spiritual bypassing. Okay, is that sort of clear, roughly? But Locke Kelly says, yeah, right. But there's also what he calls underpassing, which is where we get so into, he talked about therapeutic underpassing. We can get so into our therapeutic approach to things that we're actually not opening up to the spiritual side. He also talks about conceptual overpassing, where we're getting so good at understanding things that we're not actually able to drop down into the experience of them. There was a classic thing I think in the 50s and 60s, and I'm sure it's probably still going on, where people were getting really into Zen. People loved Zen, but they kind of loved its ideas. And there were people who were really into Zen, but didn't actually practice it, didn't actually experience what it was trying to convey. So that would be conceptual overpassing. So these are all sort of hazards. And the hazard of wheel track, wheel rut one is of a kind of underpassing. I would call it a sort of mindfulness underpassing. We're playing whack-a-mole a lot, trying to just catch every time we're off track with our mindfulness, and we're actually, I mean, of course, it's all good, but there's a risk of a kind of underpassing. Okay. Hazard of the second wheel rut. is like this. There are traditions, some forms of Zen, definitely the form of Zen that I've maximally trained in or primarily trained in, and Advaita and Neo Advaita would, I think, also fall into this category, where there isn't a whole lot of emphasis on fine-grained mindfulness, fine tuning our, our our capacity to sort of deconstruct present moment experience. Instead, there's a lot of emphasis on the big awakening. You know, don't bother with that stuff. Just discover who you really are. Discover your true nature. Don't bother with you're wasting your time on messing around with mindfulness, stress reduction. Nah, who needs that if you awaken? That you can understand that kind of thinking, right? So that would be, what would that be? I don't know what would we call that? Sort of awakening overpass. I don't quite know what to call that, but I mean, these things are tricky because there's something to that view. It's not entirely wrong. I mean, if somebody does have a profound awakening experience, it is pretty mind blowing. You do see your life in a whole new way. And sometimes it seems to be sort of enough. I mean, I'm thinking of, say, Ramana Maharshi, the famous 20th century sage in India. I forget, I think he was born in the late 19th century. He had this sort of massive awakening as a 16-year-old. And undoubtedly it happened. And he kind of crawled into the cellar under a temple for 6 months because he didn't know what to do next. And you can read about the story. I might mangle it a bit. And then luckily he met with some rishi, some spiritual master who kind of understood what had happened to him and gradually helped him sort of come out of it and be able to live from it, to integrate a way of living from it, which took maybe a few years. And he truly had suddenly had the veil pulled aside and rent asunder and seen a deeper reality of things where he was not separate and could never be separate. And, whatever the subtleties of terminology might be according to different traditions, in Buddhist, certainly Mahayana Buddhist terminology, it would be about shunyata, awakening to the truth of shunyata, awakening to the reality of Buddha nature, of one emptiness comprising all things, one emptiness full of all things, including us. And sort of, it's not just sort of, that's how it is and we're seeing it. No, that's how it is and we are it. That's the profundity of awakening. And it's incredible. It is remarkable. It is remarkable in the radicalness of its overturning of our prior way of seeing and understanding everything, basically. It's remarkable in that. So we don't want to diminish that or not acknowledge that. Yet, if that's the only thing we're after in practice, there's a big problem. Firstly, we're trying to get something which is antithetical, really, to the true nature of practice, which is that it's always showing up for what is. But this isn't doing that. It's seeking something that isn't apparently present. And they'll say, well, no, it is present now. It's just that you're not seeing it. But that's still saying you need to be in a different state than the one you're in somehow. And that's not actually the heart of practice. The heart of practice is always showing up for the way things are. I mean, that's always the bedrock of practice. You always have to start. We have to start there, and things can develop as they do from there. But it's never like we're skipping over the way things are to get to. No, you can't do that. That's sort of the heart of what practice is showing up, beginning, being present for the way things are. So that's one hazard. Another hazard of it is the idea that if you have seen this thing, you're done. Well, that's a grievously hazardous position to be in for a practitioner. I'm now done. Man, that's a risky place to be. Very risky place to be. And some people are kind of forced into it by the ideology of the tradition that they're in. And so you get these situations where, a teacher feels they have to be infallible. And if they slip, um, they have to hide it. And that's a terrible place for any human being to be put in. I'm now basically perfect and infallible because I've been through this massive experience that the tradition endorses as the one thing you really have to do. Man, I've done it. Well, at least I've been told I've done it, and now I'm cooked. Now I'm done. And what a risky, precarious, horrid little pinnacle to be placed on. Oh my God, who would want that? And it's very hazardous. It leads to all kinds of problems in Zen and other kinds of spiritual centers where there's a prevailing ideology like that. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So hence we, the royal we, I present in this book and in teaching, you gotta have an awareness of both wheel ruts. I think that's the healthy way. It's good to know about both. It's good to be open to the second, yes, and it's most important to practice the first. So look, we're going to have a break now. So I've gone over a little bit on the timetable. Um, we'll reconvene. I think we should have 15 minutes because this is rather a long block otherwise. And we'll reconvene in 15 minutes and just sort of carry on from there. So, have a nice little break, a walk, a cup of tea, whatever you'd like. Thank you so much, everybody. And thank you for these, thoughtful comments in the chat. Actually, I wanted to address a question that came in just before we go back into another shorter sit, which was just before the break. Somebody said, would you say that this is Cynthia, would you say that there can also be sudden awakenings within the gradual path? I've had experiences of profound insights into anatta, no self, in the middle of a month-long Vipassana retreat that was so clear and sudden that I felt there had been an earthquake. Well, exactly. I mean, I think that's exactly right, Cynthia. I think the heart of this sort of the sort of challenging side of realization, the second wheel rut, is that it's unconditional. It's always here. It's unconditional. So people can have experiences of it in without any practice while unloading the supermarket shopping in their kitchen. It's the only thing we can say is actually what Abby just said, that there's this line that's attributed to Robert Aiken Roshi, a Zen teacher. He said, enlightenment is an accident. Practice can make us accident prone, more accident prone. I hope that's true. I mean, we don't really know. But here's what I am sure of is that anybody who does have a sudden experience of realization, if they don't have practice going, if they haven't already developed a practice, got some practice integrated into their life, it's quite unlikely that that awakening will inform their life going forward. I think it really, I think insofar as the second wheel rut is not dependent on the first, I think is dependent on the first if it's to inform life in a new way after it's happened. Does that make sense? So I think if we are, um, if we want to have any hope of actually learning to live from um, the sort of wider reality, the wider experience of original nature, we got to have path of training and practice represented by that first wheel rut. I think that's for sure. But here's the other thing that I feel, and is another of the motivations for me to for writing this book, is that actually, if we are kind of carefully doing our mindfulness practice and our developing our capacity for connecting, which I also place on this first wheel rut. I divide, I sort of, I present the first wheel rut as actually having three dimensions. One of them is mindfulness practice, but it's also about connecting and opening up to support. And it is also about finding flow in life, which I think is actually a really important thing. You know, the flow is deeply healthy, and it's really good for us. It's sort of cathartic, and it opens us up, and it's you know we may not exactly see through the self, and the distinction between self and world may not collapse, but man is good, and but I feel that actually, in the most sort of foundational early stages of practice with mindfulness, every time we get a little new understanding of what it is to really be mindful, there is some kind of little opening that does have a flavor of, as I call it, original love in it. I think even tiny little shifts where I just recognize, hey, wow, that was a long train of thought I was just on. That is actually just a little moment of recognizing um, that there's more to this world than I think there is. It may not be. It's not some. Probably isn't some. Great dissolution of the sense of self or something. But it's important because it's some little moment of like surrender. That, oh wow, the tenacity with which I was holding to that particular train of thought has released, and it can do that. And somehow I feel that there's always some little trace of yeah of a larger love, of something like that in all our little mini breakthroughs. And I think that's really important. And I also feel that if we're really getting our mindfulness practice, and we really are seeing, finding ways that we can, be kinder with ourselves, kinder with those around us, developing more compassion, and feeling more okay. I mean, that's good. That may be enough, if you see what I mean. In other words, I suppose what I'm saying is that, again, this will be another facet of sort of pitfalls of being all in on the path of realization. That actually that can occlude very important little shifts by which we open up to greater okayness. To, we might say, more wisdom, becoming a little bit wiser, a little bit happier, a little bit kinder. That's not dependent actually on great awakenings. It's not. Um, yeah. Okay. So let me just see. Okay, sorry, just look, my path of life, my personal experiences in and out of practice have opened me, have opened up for me where I'm at this moment. Lovely. Exactly. I'm grateful to sharing this call with all of you. It's not common I can dialogue about these topics with others in my day-to-day. Yes, exactly. It's great to gather with other practitioners, and it can be very very helpful for our practice. I talk about this in the book. I say, like, mindfulness is the first in of practice. The second in or refuge of practice is in fact connecting and support in different dimensions of support that it's great to open up to them. Thirdly, sort of flow states, samadhi, absorption states. And then the fourth dimension is awakening. That's how I lay it out in the book. Is awakening the only thing that is not conditional? I know the idea of dependent arising is important in Buddhism. Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I think some would say yes. I mean, it's not. Yeah, I mean, awakening. I mean, we have to just distinguish. There's awakening that we humans do, and then there's awake nature or Buddha nature that's already here, that is not conditional. I think that's what the traditions would tend to say. Yeah, it is. It's not conditional, and everything else is sort of composed of it. And but here's the marvelous thing about dependent arising. It's just such a great term. It's the idea that nothing arises independently. Nothing arises independently, and that includes our sense of self. You know, so all things are arising because of all things. All things are arising in conjunction with all things. So um, the as a concept, that may or may not be interesting, but as an experience, it's very interesting. It's sort of it's finding that actually there's a I'm sure many of you may have tasted this at times, a kind of a sense where the sense of self is kind of quieter, and there's a sense of all things arising as a kind of flux and flow. That nothing is uh, separate from anything else. There's a interdependence that we sense, and one Alan Watts was keen on this. Actually, I don't know how many of you have read how much of Alan Watts. He's well worth reading. It's actually, I find it remarkable how much his work has held up. He was writing in the 50s and 60s. He died in 1973. I imagine you've all heard of him. He was this very popular English Englishman who was into Buddhism from an early age, and he found his natural home on the West Coast in the Bay Area. It's a great place for him to be. I think probably in the early 50s, I think he got there. He was involved in the founding of Esalen and other things. And he wrote actually several really good books, but he also talked a lot, and a lot of his talks were recorded, and so there's great repositories of talks. I'm Waking Up has the app, if any of you know it, has a fantastic library of Alan Watts talks, and you can open up almost any of them, and you're actually gonna get some good stuff. But one of the things he's keen on is the experience that was very common for him, which was exactly this dependent arising thing. He called it ji mu ge in Japanese, which is a terminology from a particular form of Chinese Buddhism, Hua Yen Buddhism, which was big for them. Ji mu ge means thing, no gap. Ji mu ge, thing, no gap. What that really means is Japanese concision. It means between one thing and another thing. between any two things, there's actually no gap. And the term G not only means thing, it can mean self. So self thing or thing self, no gap. Self thing, no gap. Self self, no gap. It's saying there's no gap anywhere. Everything is arising in conjunction with everything else. Again, as an idea, that may or may not be interesting, but as an experience, it's very interesting. You can sort of get a sense of this, and I bet you all have it sometime. It's just a little sense that the ordinary sense of self is sort of, whoa, it's a little different now, and you just sense it's all a kind of single flux of things arising. Anyway, so let's come back to after just a little. Yeah, I'm seeing that just a few more things in the chat. Yeah. Um, yeah, some loosening or lightness is relief that comes from practice, way short of awakening, but not nothing. Exactly. And I think that's really important. Um, okay. More to say, more to explore, but let's now have a little bit of quiet time again. We'll do probably 15 to 20 minutes sit. And I want to actually just, I think we're going to go to a little bit more of a Zen flavor in this sit. I might bring in a Zen, very, very simple Zen phrase. But no need to be alarmed about that. It's going to be very sort of straightforward and
Oh, so adorable.
self-explanatory. Wait, somebody is not muted, I think. Um, so anyway, let's get set up. Let's get set up for practice. In other words, establish your body the way you want to for practice. Anywhere from horizontal to vertical. And if it's vertical, let it really be balanced. Again, if your spine is not supported, and just glancing around the people with cameras on, it looks like quite a few of us may not have a supported back. So that's great, but we want it to be balanced. So if your spine is not supported, let's now close the eyes or lower the gaze and just very gently, micro movements, just rock a tiniest bit forward and then backward. This is for those whose spine is not supported. And as you're doing that, feel those sitting bones. Actually, everybody join in this. Just feel your sitting bones. Almost like they're kind of drilling down into the earth a little bit. And if your spine is not supported, then just a little movement fore and aft, just sort of in front of, bringing the weight just ahead of the sitting bones, and then just behind the sitting bones. So a tiny little sway forward and backward. And as we're doing that, we're looking for the zone of balance. It's probably not an exact point, but a sort of general area in the middle where we can stay upright without any holding. And you may find you want to slightly adjust the curvature of the spine as you're finding this balance zone. But essentially, we want the shoulders over the hips and the ears over the shoulders. And let that jaw relax as we did before. Let the jaw kind of sink into the throat a little bit. letting there be a softness in the throat, and also a little bit of just a slight relaxed extension or lengthening of the back of the neck. Imagine that there's a little thread um, just behind the crown of the head, just between the crown of the head and the back of the head. A little thread gently, gently hoisting us up just a tiny bit. And from that, we have this just a little bit more open back of the neck. The jaw hanging, the lower mandible hanging, kind of hanging down a bit. Tongue fully relaxed. Throat soft. Shoulders, arms, hands slack. Rib cage hanging like an upside down basket. Just hanging there. Belly and lower spine loose. Hanging also. Hips, legs, feet also loose. Kind of hanging, dangling almost. Starting to be aware, arriving here. Aware of the body, aware of the space around us, aware of the soundscape. There may be some intermittent sounds, and there'll likely be background sounds as well, continuous sounds. Listen in. Are there, so to speak, strata of continuous sound? Maybe there's traffic in the distance, or a wind through trees, or some sounds in the building, or some kind of hiss or soft roar or hum in the inner ear. So here's this person here's this person doing this activity called meditating. What they're actually doing right now is listening and hearing these phenomena known as sounds. This person hearing these sounds. What is this? Who is this? What is this? What's what's going on here? What is this? Don't try to figure anything out. Just bringing in a curious attitude to this experience. What is this? What is it to hear a sound? Who is it that hears? Who is it? Who really is it that hears? Who hears? It's actually an old Zen question, a koan. Who hears? There are sounds. There's the hearing of sounds. And there's the hearer of sounds. Who is that hearer? Who hears? Let's gently be bringing a little movement back into the body. If you're having a particularly interesting time, by all means, carry on. But for most of us, let's be wending our way out of the sit. Thank you very much, everybody, for your practice just now. And just a little note that we're going to be moving into another phase of our time together. And I'm going to hand it over to you, Abby, at this point. Um, yeah, see you all in just a mo. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. So we're going to move into some optional breakout rooms. So again, you'll have the option to join. You won't get automatically kicked into the ether space of Zoom breakout rooms unless you choose to. It will be groups of 4 or 5. I believe that's still the case. Yeah. And if you don't want to be part of the breakout rooms, I'm going to share a prompt and you can, journal with that on your own. You can continue your meditation. You could move with it, whatever feels right for you. And the question, which I'll put in the chat, the prompt for the breakout rooms or your choice of individual contemplation is, what's the growing edge of your practice right now? Now, yeah, so if people want to share any report outs from your breakout room, or, if you were doing your personal practice, if you want to share that in the chat, that would be really lovely to hear.
Yes, thank you. I was talking a little bit in the breakout room, but also thinking a lot myself in my practice about addressing self-criticism, which is so powerful at times in my life and in my meditation practice, and really interferes with a more grounding experience of self-love. And I just wondered if Henry might have any sort of reactions to that particular issue.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's it's a very common thing, Emily. Alas,
Yes.
that
Alas,
we
yes.
have these active inner critics, and if only they were constructive. I mean, it's okay to get some constructive criticism, but often they're just relentlessly sort of self attacking, really. And
Self-attack.
you
Yeah.
know, and so yeah, I mean, there's multiple strands of approach. In on the meditative side, what I've found particularly helpful is just calling it out. I personally use a lot of labeling practice so that I can actually identify. It's just so helpful to me to hear myself in my mind state and acknowledge what's going on by means of a label. So in other words, I would be wanting to recognize that, first of all, thinking is happening, right? Because it is indeed thinking going on if there is self criticism going on. It's happening in the realm of thought, of thinking. I'd also want to be seeing if I can actually hear the words, the speech in my mind. I find that very helpful to be able to recognize, oh my gosh, there's actually a voice talking in my mind, and to hear that speech. And so I use the label talk quite a bit and I find that really helpful because it's describing the actual phenomenon. The
I
actual
see.
experience is talk in the mind. So I would probably want to, be saying to myself, talk, talk. Talk is going on in the mind. If that's not helping,
Mhm.
I might want to get a little bit more accurate and say, critical talk is happening, judgment is happening, or whatever it is. So,
Yes.
in other words, I think that the more accurately we can recognize what's going on as a phenomenon, as an experience.
I see. So that would include the emotional aspect of it, like self-hatred, attack, mean, destroy, hurt, those kinds of experiences to label the quality of the emotions
Well,
also.
actually, I think it's absolutely right to bring that up, and I would approach that in a slightly different way. I
Okay.
would want to be aware that there's talk happening in the mind. Then I want to know what's going on in my chest area, my diaphragm area. Can I feel some sensation associated with emotion? Right. And on that level, I actually want to just recognize the sensation
Okay.
and not put an overarching label on it like attack, self-criticism, self-harm, or something like that, whatever. No, I want to know what I'm actually feeling by way of sensation,
I see.
tightness,
I see.
density,
Mm.
whatever it is,
Mhm.
something contracted,
Mm.
what am I actually feeling? And really try to locate it in my body. And it's probably going to be primarily chest area. It could be high chest, mid chest, lower chest. It might be more to one side. It could be in the diaphragm area, just below the chest. Sometimes it can be in the belly. And I want to actually find it as a sensation. And
Mm.
then here's the tricky but helpful part is if I can just recognize it's there and basically allow it.
Yes.
And because I'm probably going to be
Right.
resisting it a whole lot. But
Right.
the great thing with the switch to sensation is that it tends to actually quiet the talk down.
Yes.
And so I do that a lot. And I think coming to feel it as sensation, locate it, get a sense of the quality of it. Is it a tightness? Is it a heaviness? Whatever.
Mm.
There are many other things it might be, by the way. And
Mm-hmm.
and can
Yes.
I can I can I detect if there's strong resistance to it? Then
Yes.
then I actually then want to experience that
The
resistance.
resistance. Yeah.
I want to know what does resistance feel like.
Yes.
Okay, so
Wonderful.
stuff to
Thank
work
you.
with, Emily. Thanks for bringing that up.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Sure thing. Yeah.
Hello, Henry. So, I've been sitting with and I guess struggling with the idea of gratitude for for some time, and I would like to share quickly like the where what I came to and get your thoughts or reaction to it. So there's something about gratitude that I can feel it directed towards somebody, right? But I struggle with it when it's with things that are more, let's say, existential, or like just being grateful that I can breathe, or that I have a place to stay, or all these things, because immediately I go to all the people that don't have whatever it is that I'm grateful for. And I feel that if I direct that gratefulness towards that something, whatever that something is, at the same time, I lost Henry in the video.
I'm hearing you
At
loud and clear and
Yeah, yeah.
seeing
At
you.
the same time, that something should get also the anger for all the injustice. But what I can do is just what I did for myself is I just changed the word gratitude for more like pleasure or appreciation or enjoyment, which seems more directed like inward instead of outward. And I don't have a problem with that. I can enjoy even the sensation of breathing or whatever it is, the sensations in the body without this struggle. So that's the thought.
I think that sounds to me very sort of skillful on your part. You know, that if I understood it right, you're saying that you don't have trouble feeling gratitude towards particular people,
Mhm.
and presumably for their presence in your life or some way. But when it comes to more existential things like, I don't know, having a roof over your head and having sustenance and being able to breathe, you find it harder to, you find it more fruitful to, as a nuance really, to move from gratitude to appreciation and enjoyment. Well,
Yeah.
I sort of, I can understand that, and it makes sense to me. I mean, I don't see any problem with that whatsoever. You know, a lot of the practices that are around affective states, such as gratitude, or such as metta, loving kindness, or compassion. And by the way, it sounded like you were naturally going to compassion when you were thinking of
Mhm.
one of the problems you had with gratitude is, what about the other people who don't have this? Well, that's a
Yeah.
compassionate response, you know. Um, and compassion, yeah, can have a sort of righteous, I mean a good, in a good way, a righteous anger, an energy,
Mhm.
a healthy energy of wishing to redress wrongs in the world. You know, I think that's a facet actually of compassion, a sort of protective, you know, uh, um, wholesome um, sort of grievance on the part of people who are treated unjustly and are oppressed, and cruelty uh, acted out upon them. But I think the main thing really with these affective practices about affective states is feeling the condition, the wholesome
Mhm.
condition, and appreciation is great. You know, I mean, it's
Yeah.
really another kind of another form of gratitude, really. You know,
Mm.
and so I think that sounds just spot on to me, Daniele. I don't see any problem with that at all. I think that's wise of you. Yeah, thanks.
Great. Thank you.
Abby, thank you very much, Jen. Look, should we do a couple of chat ones, Abby? What do you think? Or one chat one before we go to another spoken one? Do you think, Abby?
Yeah. So I have one from the chat that someone posted earlier. Would love if you would address the role of psychological insight in developing along the path.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, you know, I just think if I look at myself and my own path of practice as it continues to develop and unfold, I hope, you know, I mean, it's been absolutely crucial to me to have. I mean, I've had various kinds of psychotherapeutic support over the years, and so there's that kind of psychological insight that has helped me with. Um, I think there are certain kinds of psychological insight that probably come anyway from practice. Um, but personally, I almost see this as another way of looking at the two wheel ruts, actually. I mean, it's not exactly how it's stated in the early Chinese Buddhist tradition, but in a sense, I think having a meditation practice personally for me has been greatly assisted by also having a psychological or psychotherapeutic path, at least at times. And I think they work very well together. You know, actually, I think if someone is in therapy, it might be great that they're also having a meditation practice, because, you know, meditation can be this sort of baseline that we come back to that just gives us more space, which can make psychotherapy happen more fruitfully and more openly. Um, Conversely, I mean, certainly I've found that certain times when, in some way, my practice has been continuing, but I haven't felt that there's so much development going on in it. Some psychotherapy has been incredibly helpful for unlocking things, and so I've found they kind of help one another in a long-term way. But that's, I'm sure there are many meditation teachers who might, I don't know, see it differently. No, go all in on the meditation. I don't know. There's different views, but I think trust your own instincts about it, really.
Thanks, Henry. I think we have time to get to at least one more before we have to wrap up. Jerry, if you would like to ask yours.
Thank you. It's more of I think, a sharing than a question. And I'm a little bit hesitant because it is a cutting edge that it's almost like unbelievable that I'm at this, what I'm about to say, because I have, I think, and I know for a lifetime, thought that my courage and strength and resilience was in the contraction. Uh, and My internal Dharma produces book titles or story titles that I'll never do. But I know that they're important, but I don't understand them fully. And this one was in the last couple of years, the 70-year-old, I'm 72 now, the 70-year-old temper tantrum, or there was another one, but I felt the power in cutting my nose to spite my face. And so what has ended up happening recently is there's a rewriting of the script, and there's some forgiveness. And it doesn't feel like I've lost the battle or given in, because I couldn't forgive myself until it goes hand in hand. And then there's a rewriting of people I really spent a lifetime disliking or hating, like a brother, and realizing the poor guy didn't even know how much he was hurting, and neither did I, because it looked like he was winning. So I don't know where this is going to go, but I can't see it's going to lead me in a bad direction. It's just I'm sort of, and I'm not saying that I've mastered this, and I'm not saying that I'm great. I'm just sort of, where did this come from after so many years? And it's very freeing, actually. That we're all human, and my parents loved everybody in the family, but it represents many generations of scripts.
Yeah.
So we're carrying many, many, many generations, and to hold someone responsible for their ignorance, I don't know.
Yeah, that sounds very wise to me, and I like the sense that you're what you started out by saying, that you're questioning whether that contraction is actually really the source of your strength and hope and resilience. I couldn't agree more. It's like it's really beautiful, and the softening and the opening and the letting go of such a tight hold on our views and opinions and judgments and so on is absolutely great. And yeah, I agree that forgiveness of self, forgiveness of others can flood in, and we can absolutely see this heritage of ancestral uh, ways of doing things, and of trauma, even and lovely. Thank you, Jerry, for sharing that. Great. So I think that might be all we have time for, alas. But I did read actually a lot of great comments and questions in the chat, and I'll be looking over it again after our session. So thank you all for posting in the chat. Abby, back to you, and yeah, I think I'll get a chance to say one more thing in a moment, so I'll hold back for then. Thank you.
Thanks, Henry, and thanks everybody for the questions. I'm going to put these links in the chat, but just briefly, I'm just sharing some links that Henry is doing some different in-person retreats in different places. And there's also going to be a link to the app that's been referenced that some of you are already practitioners of the way. But there's a couple retreats in California, one in July and one in October. And then there's also a London retreat happening in August with Henry if you're interested in further practice.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me in. I'm really honored and delighted to have had this time with all of you for joining. Thank you so much, everybody who's here and who might be listening to this as a recording as well. Thank you very much indeed. It's been an honor to be with you all, and may we all may our practice be of help to all beings in this world. Thank you.